My name is Shara Mashinska, and I'm part of the spiritual ministry team at Unity of Tustin. And today I am delighted to continue our Conscious Conversation program with a series of talks with the Reverend Doctors Gary and Jane Simmons, which we are entitling the Evolving Ministry series. So, just in the few months since my last conversation with Gary and Jane, they have continued to evolve their work, their integral ministry model, developing programming, creating a course which is going to be offered through Unity Worldwide Spiritual Institute. So, not only do these talks give us the time and the spaciousness and the depth to elaborate on emerging ways to reimagine spiritual community within our unity movement. In my opinion, they also serve as a forum to help keep up with you guys, to help to keep up with Gary and Jane, and really to appreciate their pioneering work, which gives us a glimpse of how ministry just might unfold in the field of infinite possibilities. And with that, I'd like to say hello, Gary and Jane, and welcome to our ongoing Conscious Conversation series.
Oh, thank you, Shara. We're so excited to be a part of this exploration, and it's
Glad to be here.
yeah, it's exciting to be able to look at what's possible and apply those possibilities to the challenges and opportunities we have in ministry in these times.
Which is part of one of your recent blogs. And I think you called it The Inconvenient Truth About Minister-Centric Ministry. So I found it to be a wonderful blog, and I thought it'd be a great place to start. So what is the inconvenient truth about a minister-centric ministry? And then maybe as a corollary to that, why do we need to evolve?
Okay, so first of all, let's just talk about why we should evolve, and trends are such that it's very obvious now that 9 out of 10 churches have either plateaued or are in decline because of declining attendance. And COVID has made this even a more dire situation for many churches that are living from month to month. So suffice to say that our current ministry practice, which is centered around a minister as being the psychological glue that holds the community together, that particular model is particularly vulnerable to the fluctuations in attendance and financial support. So just in the context of our current ministry practice as being insufficient to really manage the decline, other issues have to do with the dynamics associated with a ministry that has a parental figure, such as a minister, kind of the head of a community, which is ostensibly a spiritual family. And associated in those terms are family system dynamics, where it's very common to, especially in smaller churches, for there to be drama as an aspect of organizational life. So there's no one inconvenient truth about the current ministry practice. There's a number of inconvenient truths that have to do with the trends associated with what's happening in the world these days, independent of COVID, and how we are challenged by not having been able to meet in person, not being able to collect the Sunday love offering in the traditional way.
There's even the why underneath the why. So one of the reasons it sounds like we really do need to evolve is because of decline. But then there's the question of why are we in decline? And it sounds like there's something about the traditional infrastructure of church that maybe we're outgrowing, or culturally there are changes that mean that we're outgrowing. So I was just wondering, as you speak to that, if you can maybe add that piece as well, like what's causing the decline that's also requiring the evolution.
Well, there's a number of influences. One, the traditionals and the baby boomers are aging out, so that's a big factor. In 20 years, both the traditionals and the baby boomers will probably not be in the revenue stream of churches. So that's one situation. Another situation is the current way in which we fund our ministries in the context of the tithing practice. Tithing has been the traditional funding model of most New Thought ministries. That is also problematic. Tithes and love offerings are insufficient to meet the operational expenses of most unity churches. So consequently, most unity churches have to fundraise in a significant way in order to manage the shortfalls. So consequently, people shift out of the fulfillment of purpose in people's lives into survival mode. So church becomes about survival as opposed to the fulfillment of purpose. In another context, our current ministry practice does not cultivate the values of ownership or partnership or self-integrity. It doesn't necessarily foster or support a depth of shadow integration, which is important in this day and age. Also, our training as New Thought spiritual leaders is insufficient to really help us manage how to evolve our ministry's culture and its practice. So I've written about a number of different inconvenient truths and consequences. There's the nuns. There's 25% of adults nowadays don't have anything to do with church. It's not that they're not spiritual. It's just that they're not involved in any organized religion. And then there are the duns. Those are the baby boomers that are exiting churches because they're tired. They're just tired of the plot, pay, pray model of ministry. And and it's nothing to do with there's something wrong with things that are happening in churches these days. It's just that there are forces at work that require of us to adapt and to evolve. Otherwise, we're just succumb to the statistics.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Um, one of the things I read in one of your recent blogs, you've talked about the challenge of transitioning from a ministry practice that's focused on and funded by people feeling spiritually fed, valued, and special, and moving towards a cultivating ownership and growing the emotional and spiritual maturity of community members. So I'd love if you could flesh out the difference between spiritually feeding a community, valuing a community, and have them feeling special, as a and shifting to cultivating ownership and growing emotional and spiritual maturity.
Okay, so the problem with our current ministry practice, which has as its primary values with respect to funding, is that people need to feel spiritually fed, they need to feel valued, and they need to feel like their presence matters. There's nothing wrong with these values. It's just that it sets up the ministry up, because the moment that a person decides I don't feel valued today, or has evidence to support that through some dynamic that happened in the church, it's too vulnerable to people just deciding. People withhold when they're not happy with what's going on, and so that dynamic is problematic in our churches. So our new funding model is not based upon whether or not people are spiritually fed. It's based upon the principle of ownership and partnership and being in one's own personal integrity with respect to their willingness to be in ownership and contribute their fair share, what they can do. So it's a different context for funding a church, and it requires a different level of emotional and spiritual maturity in order for it to be effective.
If there are changes or dynamics that are very uncomfortable for me, I might have more ease to step away because my belonging is kind of externally indexed. But what you're saying is when we create a community that is more about maturity, when I see a problem, I actually stay because my belonging is tied to the interconnectedness of the organization working well. Is that kind of a fair summary?
So think of it this way: it's a shift from making sure everybody feels okay, you're happy, you're okay, to empowering people, giving them the tools to take ownership of their life. So it's a shift out of trying to be so holding people's hand and making sure they're okay, they're not bothered by anything, and instead empowering them to take ownership of their life, to embrace their discomfort, to look at their shadow and own it and use it to bring forth a greater sense of well-being and worth. So that leads to the other side of the whole process. Absence of there being a component within the church to grow and develop the emotional and spiritual maturity of the congregation, you're not evolving the church. You're just maintaining the status quo.
The whole idea of tithing to where you're fed, spiritually fed, has been a really major part of how we fund the church. And so the shift from tithing to source, tithing to the source of your being fed, and instead shifting to tithing as source. There's a whole difference there. In one of them, you're giving money because you have been fed by something, and something the minister said, for instance, and so you're going to tithe to the church. On the other side of it, and this is where the spiritual maturity comes in, we stepped into that role of being the change that we're seeking. And now we're tithing as source. We're being the source of transformation change in the church and in the community. It's not just the church, but it's finding ways to support God showing up. I mean, it's not exactly that, but it's like you understand that you have a role in it, that it's not just a passive thing where you're receiving. Now you're actually an integral part of the process here. And people can get behind it. This is the whole idea of being the change and living the mission, and supporting the mission in financially, as well as by showing up to serve and to be the change in action. So that's the major difference I found in the funding.
It's tithing to where we have opportunities to even experiment with self-actualization, and where we get to experiment with creating. And then I could see in that model, if there's something that seems dysfunctional, I would also be empowered to have a voice in changing it.
Sure.
Yes, exactly. But the biggest change, the whole thing about transformation, we go from translational to transformational teachings. I think we talked about that last time, maybe. But it's the difference between just feel-good teachings, which I love feel-good teachings. They are lovely, and there's a place for them. It's not that you don't want to help people learn how to live their life in a more positive, healthy way. Certainly that is part of what we do. But true transformation is learning to be that, to be the change, to step into this new way of being where you are actually expressing what you want to see in the world. That's how change happens. We become the change that we're trying to see happen. And to become that, we have to learn how to take action that makes us feel the way we're going to feel when it comes to pass. And again, this is something we've taught for years when it comes to becoming more prosperous in our world, or whatever it is, that you have to feel the part to before we see it in action. I used to love the acronym for faith, feeling as if the thing happened. And when we do that, we start to live it in a much deeper way. And so taking authentic action that not only demonstrates the change, but makes us become the change is a really big part of integral ministry. It's helping people to step into this new way of being that really connects with the truth of who we are. We step out of that kind of little box of, egoic beliefs that we tend to, express, and we move beyond that. And it's an emergence of something greater. And that's what excites me about this. He is the guru when it comes to all of the spiritual cooperatives and all these things. He's just, that's his genius, is actually putting that into practice and making it in such a way that others can learn it and follow it. But where I get jazzed is in the actual transformative experience of cleaning up your past, doing the shadow work so that you can actually move forward in your life and not be held back by the unconscious, actions. I mean, we don't even know this conditioned behavior that we have and all of that stuff. We don't even realize how much we're kind of imprisoned in that until we learn how to get beyond it. And it's a very liberating way of living. And
it really does underscore mission as transformation, because I think that, and that is a eternal question, especially for me with a psychotherapy background. It's, how does transformation happen? How does healing happen? And there's it to me, it's an ongoing mysterious question. So what I hear is that you have both done a lot of experimentation and innovation to find out how spiritual communities can be structured to make it more likely that the participation will result in an actual transformation and evolution of consciousness.
yes, and my aspect of it is been much more about here's the question I've been asking. How do you evolve a culture? How do you change a culture? That is a huge question. We know that this culture is ready to emerge, and what's our role in it? And it's that whole hospicing the old and midwifing the new, and putting into practice these kind of ways of helping people to just move along that evolutionary spiral. And that's how it happens. And it's not a small question, and it's not a small process, that's for sure.
But a key piece that you just said that I find very inspiring is this is a movement slightly away from strictly individual evolution of consciousness. And it is almost working to facilitate individual evolution of consciousness through creating an evolutionary culture, which then almost is like the tuning fork that we will all rise from as the body of Christ, but in this case, as the body of the church.
Yes, I love that image of the tuning fork, because a big part of this is education. We spent a lot of time learning about the spiral and how it shows up culturally, how it shows up individually, and we as a group we're in the question, how do you change a paradigm? And so it's an ongoing evolutionary process that really excites me, because I have known for decades that we're on to something big here, that there is something that is emerging and has been, I think back on, might be before your time, but the harmonic convergence and, all these things that happened way back in those wonderful 80s, and, all these meditations for world peace. And this is it, age of Aquarius is here. But I really believe that we are on that cusp, and that the more of us that awaken to that, do our own individual, it's not like we don't do the individual evolutionary work. And this is where the shadow work comes in. And this is where expanding our understanding of who we are happens. But then collectively, that tuning fork of evolutionary change, that calls us to something higher. And the more of us that hear that tuning fork and join in with it, the stronger it gets, and the more we reach a tipping point eventually.
Beautiful, beautiful. Gary, you clearly want to participate in this conversation with a graphic. So
yes, I'm wanting to. I mean, because Jane had mentioned cultural change. This is the crux of the effort is that we have to evolve our culture, and it just doesn't happen by accident. And so if we have a sense of understanding the principles behind how cultures evolve and avoid triggering culture so that there's resistance, that's what we have to kind of understand. So this little graph, I just Googled this. And it basically is a bell curve, and it basically has certain principles associated with it. In other words, if in any kind of large sample of a population, you'll have certain standard deviations from the norm. So right there in the middle of the bell curve is the majority of the people. So the majority of a church culture lives within one standard deviation of the norm. And so in a sense, basically, you have in this bell curve also, as you look towards the left-hand side, you have a small percentage of the group really innovators, and then a little larger percentage of the group called early adopters. And then you have the first set of the early majority being the pragmatists, and then the late majority being those that are skeptical, and then the rest of the folks are laggards. So you have a sense of where the resistance is and where the opportunities are. Most mistakes that are made in terms of trying to change culture is trying to move the established culture. And the problem with the established culture is that you have forces of pragmatism and skepticism don't lend themselves to innovation and trying new things. So the established culture is not interested in trying new things. And when we try to evolve the established culture, that's where all the resistance comes from. But what if we focus not on trying to evolve the whole culture, but just getting a smaller group of folks who can really own the possibility of bringing forth something that is new and innovative, and get those folks excited, and then let those folks convince the early majority as to the efficacy of this. And basically, this has been our approach. Our approach is not to try to carpet bomb the entire church and say, here, we have to do this, but it's to take a small group of people and teach them what we know about what's possible and get them excited. And their excitement then carries the rest of the ministry away.
Now, this is very exciting. It's really helping my kind of seeing. So even within the ministry, you're going to have the early adopters. So you're not going to force this upon people who may just be on the other side of the curve.
Right.
So is that true? Is that true? Let's say a ministry was in your coaching program and they started to implement this integral ministry model. There is room for it to be okay for a percentage of the membership not to participate. Like, so if someone's not interested in the shadow work, or if they're not interested in the spirit groups,
Right.
they have the self-determination to opt out of that programming.
So it's, you have to have this sense that for instance, the shadow work program, spirit groups, for instance, while you want everybody to experience the benefit of those, you don't need everybody to experience the benefit of those to introduce it and to help it take on, a meaningful place in the life of the community's culture. So for instance, when Jane and I first arrived in Spokane 6 years ago, we began with the shadow work component. And so we didn't tell everybody, come do the shadow work. We invited just a small group of people with personal invitation to come. And we had 45 people come out of that first wave. And then those 45 people told the rest of the church. Then we had 135 people. So that's the way we introduce new programs, is to get the early adopters to really demonstrate its values, so that the early majority says, hey, wait a minute, I want to have part of that. And the snowball begins to build. So this is an approach that is not taught in New Thought, but yet it's an approach that we have found to be very effective in our coaching program.
Oh, it's very helpful. And it actually answers a question I've had, an internal question I've had, is how do you handle resistance? And this is at least one way. One very effective way is you just invite that process of cultural evolution to do what it knows how to do in its own time, by cultivating the early adopters and those who are exciting about it.
Right. So to give you another example, for instance, of how this happens, for instance, in my coaching program, I will introduce the integral membership system, which we've sort of alluded to, and we can talk about that at another time. But suffice to say that it's a seamless path from first timer to competent leader. And so this new membership system obviously is different than what an established church is used to. So they'll ask the question, well, why do we need a different membership system? What's wrong with the one that we have? And then I will say, well, it's a seamless path from first timer to competent leader. You don't have that right now. And they'll say, well, yeah, but so that group doesn't move. They question, they don't know, they don't understand. But then when you take that, but then when I say, well, none of this affects you, the system is not for those who are established, it's for those who are brand new. And they go, oh, okay. And so
Wow, so that's part of the rationale of the existing members being grandfathered.
yes, exactly.
Beautiful.
Exactly. There's no deficit to the established course. See, that's the problem, is that most change initiatives are a whole system and it happens all at once and everybody's in a different place. But so when you introduce a whole system change process that first includes the early adopters to demonstrate its effectiveness, and then it migrates into those who are a low-hanging fruit in the early majority, then the rest of the system, it creates tipping points. And once we get those tipping points to happen, the rest comes online. And those that don't, they're just outliers. Just let them be. It's okay, it's all right if they don't want to do anything, and it's not an issue.
When I hear you and I've read you, I don't hear much about the Fillmores, but yet you're being embraced by Unity Worldwide Ministries and UWSI. So I'm curious, where do our founding teachings and teachers fit into this? And I also see it as a question for me, because I really enjoy reading the Fillmores, but I was a philosophy major, and I kind of have a sweet spot for that type of reading. And I think I'm an outlier in my cohort and below. So I sometimes wonder how we keep that in when the original works might resonate less and less with younger people. So I'm curious how you've been navigating that, and what you have to say about that.
First of all, I want to say one thing is that in that bell curve, I'm one of the pragmatists. That's where I would land. And so every time something else would come up, I would have to be convinced of it. And that was good, because if I didn't understand it, whoa, help me with this. It helped to clarify it before we kind of moved it into the ministry. And so, this has to be done with that kind of an eye for understanding the whole system here, how it's going to affect. And, I'm kind of the mother hen, fretting about everybody and making sure everybody's okay and all that stuff. But so just to say, I'm not one of those early adopters that just jumps in. I have to be convinced on this myself. But what I want to say about this is that this is what we're talking about is integral ministry model, and this model can work for Buddhists. It can work for Christians. It can work for, now in our case, we apply it to New Thought, and it's a system, and it's structure, it's practices that can be utilized in any kind of culture, ministry culture. And so where are the Fillmores? They are right in there. We're not telling people what to teach. We do give some guidance on how to work with the spiral and that sort of thing. But I did a whole series on spiral dynamics, and we brought in unity principles and teachings, and we're not saying to turn our back on any of that, but just to say that this stuff can be used in other modalities, other denominations, because we don't, it's not about theology. We're not telling people you have to, this is what you teach. So the Fillmores are right in there. And I have a sense that Charles would be quite taken by this whole thing. He was always an early adopter right there.
Yes,
And he,
yes.
yes. And so I feel like that the unity message, this is such a good avenue for the unity message, because it really puts the one presence, one power into practice, and especially the shadow work we do. It's how do you live your life with one presence, one power, instead of everyone's against me, or things are against me, or life is against me, which is not about one presence, one power. How do we live our lives with that principle? And the shadow work that we do is a tool to help us when we feel like life is against us, to actually get to the oneness of it all.
Oh,
Um,
it's so very helpful. That it's another, piece as I have this conversation with you, things come together, that the integral ministry model is an infrastructure, and spiritual communities can choose the content that they are called and inspired to weave within that infrastructure. So there's a
exactly.
lot of freedom, and then it's very congruent with our unity, I would say, founding teachings, because Charles and Myrtle, they were evolutionary in they were on the cutting edge. They were early adopters. So how do we stay on the cutting edge, which is actually being true to our unity identity, while maintaining our unity identity? And one way to do that is focus on infrastructure as the driver forward.
So one thing to keep in mind is that the Fillmores never really were into church necessarily. They were more interested in the teachings, and so um, Charles Fillmore wasn't around when Ken Wilber developed integral theory, but I'm sure he would have soaked that up, just like he did all the Eastern philosophy and all the ways in which he saw spiritual principles being articulated through many different traditions. So our sense is that this indeed honors our founders, honors our foundation, and as a matter of fact, it fulfills it in some fashion, because Charles and Myrtle would never want us to get stagnated, or never would want us to kind of kind of succumb to the decline. I mean, and so if we don't do anything that kind of aligns with that innovative effort to really use what we're having right now, leverage it as a possibility to move forward. If we're not doing that, then we're not really living in the spirit of the Fillmore's tradition and what they set forth as being a way in which we could hold this wonderful idea of unity and move it forward.
Oh, it's beautiful. It resonates so well. It's actually settles something. So lovely. So at this point, I'm wondering, where would you like to go next with this conversation?
For the last 5 years, I've had a coaching practice where I've had a number of clients which have been in the process of replicating the successes that we've demonstrated at Unity Spiritual Center Spokane. So my coaching program helped inform Jane and I in terms of what it is that we would put into a course. If we were to conceive of a course, a year-long certificate program for New Thought spiritual leaders, that you don't have to be a minister to take this course. You just have to be committed to wanting to learn this model, as well as the very same course being an internship option for ministerial programs. They're all required to do some kind of internship. It doesn't have to be in a church ministry. It could be within a certificate program in which they would learn how to bring forth the principles that Jenny and I have outlined in our program. So my coaching program has informed us with respect to what we're going to be putting into our certificate and internship program. So Deborah Fraunfelter, who is the director of the Unity Worldwide Spiritual Institute, had asked Jane and I, based upon a survey of the ministerial students, to create a course on an introduction to integral ministry practice, which would become a prerequisite to our certificate/internship program. In addition to that course, a prerequisite to that course is the quantum living process, or the Q process, the shadow work program. So right now, ministerial students have an elective of taking the quantum living process. They'll have another elective to take the introduction to the integral ministry practice. And then in June, hopefully, of 2022, we will launch our certificate internship program, year-long program. So that is in creation right now, and we're working with the principals at Unity Worldwide Spiritual Institute to bring that into being. Meanwhile, Jane and I are creating the content and the experiential dimensions of that program. All the while, I am still involved in coaching my clients in their evolutionary process. Now, in coaching my clients, there have been specific requisites or requirements that I have imposed upon them, such as they had to say yes to taking on a practice mission statement, transforming lives, inspiring people to make a positive difference in our world. They had to say yes to spirit groups, bringing on a small group ministry program that was founded by Mindy Odland. And they have to say yes to the quantum living process, having someone or others in their church trained to be their own in-house facilitator of that shadow work program. They had to say yes to all that. And so those were compulsory requirements because it was they were embedded parts of the whole model. And so all these ministries had to go through their own resistance in terms of being told, we have to do it this way. And so for the first 2 years, we worked on how to transcend that resistance, but include the necessary needed elements that people had to have. As changes happened, they needed to include things that would keep them connected to their traditions. And so we learned over the years that it's how to prepare a community for cultural change, which we didn't. We had to learn the hard way because we made some mistakes in our journey. And things can go every which way when you're dealing with people. It's just the nature of the dynamic. So I just wanted to make clear that while I have written a lot on my blogs about the coaching program and what's happened in that regard, what's going to happen in the certificate and the internship program is going to be much more comprehensive, and it's going to backfill all of the theory and the principles and the why and the strategies and the how-tos with respect to moving and shifting in culture. And that's the real hard part to kind of articulate just in an interview. It takes a course of study to really build all of the requisite components of that kind of conceptual model for a person to really have a sense of what's entailed.
In my introduction, I kind of playfully said, we have to have these conversations ongoing to keep up with you. But there's some truth there, because even what you just said has clarified things for me. I still had the older kind of strict version of what implementing integral ministry looks like. And there are still components that you just tend to work, or like you said last time, tend to tetra-activate consciousness and make the conditions of evolution more likely. But your programming and implementation continues to evolve and change as you learn new things from other people and from the field.
Right. So just one other tidbit that I think that Jane could contribute to this as well, and that is, you asked the question in an email back and forth about, well, why is it about this particular shadow work program that is so integral to this, and why can't we just say, well, we're committed to shadow work, and why does it have to be this? And so while it's true that yes, there's a lot of different approaches to shadow integration and doing the deeper inner work, and certainly we're not laying claim to ours is the only one that is effective. But in terms of evolving culture, you can't have everybody do whatever they want to do in order for a cultural dynamic to evolve. Everybody has to be in the same practice in order for there to be an energetic tipping point that is created to where it won't revert back to its old way. And so because, unity and new thought is like herding cats, everybody wants to do their own thing. Nobody wants to be told what to do. You have to kind of be at that stage of readiness to kind of say, okay, I'm going to commit to doing this, to have this experience, because everybody else is doing this and they're having an experience that is creating this energetic field of support. And so when we're all in a common practice, there's a depth, an energetic depth, a palpable feeling.
It's wonderful. Like what I hear too, if we look at the spiral, we look at include and transcend, there's an aspect of this model that requires a healthy expression of the blue mean, that we do have to experience some healthy obedience. And then from that, we can learn experientially what works and what doesn't. But then in that process, it creates a cohort and even some energy and a field of coherence that then has our spiritual communities become, a word you've used in some of your languaging, more of that interbeing. Yeah,
It
lovely.
does. And one of the beautiful parts of this is that when you go back in your own life, the spiral, it's mirrored in our own personal developmental stages. And if in our red, creating our the terrible twos, creating our ego time of our life, if we have arrested development in that arena, and through this process of the triggering, we go back and discover, oh, this is what that's about. And we do the integrative work for that. Then now we can move, until we do, we're sort of stuck on that ladder. We can't kind of move up the rung. We're weighted down with the past that hasn't been integrated yet. And as we integrate it, we start to open up to a greater expression of who we are, and that we can bring a healthy red now forward and healthy blue as we go through those times of our lives and clean up our unfinished business.
It's beautiful. It reminds me of an image I have is when I was in college, I was a terrible potter. And that was partly because I was impatient and I would never work the lumps properly out of my clay. So when I would make a pot and you literally bring it up, if you start with a lump, even though it gets smaller, that lump goes up the entire vase, no matter how high it is. So, whether you're in the blue meme or the orange meme or the green meme, you're still bringing up the unfinished business or intergenerational trauma or whatever wound you had. And it strikes me that has to be a key role of spiritual community, is helping us heal not only what hurts us in the present, but what we're bringing up from the past, because that's who we're going to become in the future. And you're saying experientially, you've seen the shadow work really do that, so you can believe in it. And I guess that's where the obedience comes, because to be quite honest, one of the reasons for that question is because when I read about the shadow work, many things you talk about wake something up in me, that just doesn't. So, so then it's hard to say, oh yeah, let's do the shadow work as a community, but I don't know what I'm talking about because I haven't done it. So there are certain things that you're tasking us to trust, do, and then evaluate.
Yes, and the shadow work, it's not the feel good part of our work, and yet it has such amazing results. And the feel good comes after. It's like we have to slog through this, but what liberation we get. The lumps, we stop bringing the lumps up with us. I love that analogy. It's a great one. What a joy when you realize, something that can trigger me, when I find what that is and I actually work with the past to integrate it. Now that same thing, it doesn't have the effect anymore. It doesn't push my buttons. It's benign. And that's when oh my goodness, this used to send me right over the edge. And now I can't even remember why. It's so different.
I think that's the barometer of true transformation. When what used to be a trigger is now almost like a curiosity, like something, it gets
Yes.
it in the orbit. Uh,
Yes.
so no, that actually just reinforces what you're talking about, but the early adopters, even your testimonials bring up my buy-in. And then if I had that testimonial from my good friend who I have lunch with after service on Sunday, that would even raise that more. And if I did have some resistance, just reinforcing the healthy obedience that is part of a healthy, functioning, complete psyche. To try it and then decide for yourself.
Yes, and we tell people when they're going through it, you will have resistance. That count on it, but do the work on the resistance. You see,
Mm-hmm.
because you're right, it'll be connected into the blue era of our life, no doubt, or maybe. I mean, there's a good chance that it would, and we can work with that. Now I see where that came from, and um, it's like a puzzle. Every time now when I get triggered, I'm like, oh, I can't wait to see what I find out this time. And how great I get the opportunity to clean this up, whatever it is. And it becomes a much freer way of living our lives, very liberating and expansive. It's quantum, we call it the quantum living process because it's so expansive and it goes beyond the limits that we have set for ourselves. And when that happens, it's joyous. I mean, we just start to really see that I can change and I can become more. And it is true that, all these things that we've heard all these years about how much more we are, you start to live into that in a greater
Well,
way.
as we go up the spiral, let me ask a very orange question. How do we know we're making progress? How do we measure achievement? How do we know we're being successful? How have you both navigated those types of questions?
Well, we have, when we introduced a practice mission statement, we mentioned that most mission statements aren't measured. You can't know if what you're actually fulfilling. And so we introduced the statement, we've already talked about transforming lives. And so we measure it. We had a process called Conscious Conversations. After about 3 years of us being in ministry, we interviewed every person in the church, and we asked them to share their understanding of our mission and whether or not they've experienced its fulfillment in their lives. And so we have had the experience of functioning from Orange with respect to developing the data that helps give evidence to the people, that help the early and late majorities to understand what's going on. So Orange is very important to us in terms of evolving culture, because data is what's necessary to help people understand the trends and where the movement needs to take place.
We
Wonderful.
also,
So that is part of the model. Part of the model is more of this qualitative measurement, but it is measured.
right, we also introduced something called transformational stories. And once a month, we would have people, first of all, they'd contact me to say they had an experience they wanted to talk about, an example of how they'd transformed, or they would talk about a spiritual life hack that they had used and how it helped them, whatever it was. So they would contact me, tell me what it was. I would have them write it out and practice telling it under 7 minutes, had to be 5 to 7 minutes. And they would send me their final copy, and so I would work with them. I'd help them to edit or whatever, and then once a month they would share it with everybody. And so this was another way that we were kind of gathering stories of transformation as well.
And so our effort has been to every pain point that we've experienced, we've been in the question, what is a practice, what is a way, what is a system or a process that, had we had that in place, we would have avoided this whole dynamic to begin with. And so as we begin to think in terms of creating the field that we want to inhabit, then it's not about fixing or trying to manage what has been. It's more about moving into what we're trying to co-create together. And so we're co-creating the practice as well as developing a new sense of being in community. We're wanting to be in community, but not in the family system dynamic of community. We're wanting to be in the beloved community system of community, where we value and treat each other as equals, as mirrors unto our own divinity, as well as mirrors unto our own shadow. And so there's a different context for how we do church, not what we experience as our own spiritual journey. That stays enriched in its own soul's purview. You know, where the model has nothing to do with, you know, what people are experiencing as what they value in terms of their spiritual journey. It's trying to amplify their capacity to experience transformation, as well as a more viable way of coming together as an organization.
Wonderful. Very inspiring. Thank you. Thank you. Any other closing remarks, and perhaps a preview of maybe what would be the next good place to focus?
Well, it's just we can look at a lot of different dynamics. Part of what is really helpful is to kind of see how this new model addresses some of the historical issues that we've had in terms of doing church the old way. I mean, there's a number of issues, such as the funding. The whole dynamic of funding is problematic now, so we can surely talk about our new funding model, the spiritual cooperative, and how that's implemented through our integral membership system. So there's a lot more we can talk about. And we can also kind of reiterate some components of what experiences we're going to try to create for those who will participate in our certificate and internship program.
Okay, that sounds wonderful. Any last words from you, Jane?
Just that I'm very excited about this, and thank you for asking, because these are great questions and they really open me up to a greater understanding of it all as well. So appreciate you very much.
Oh, no, appreciate you both. It's been a joy and a wonderful learning for me personally as well. So thank you for this conscious conversation. There will be more. And for those of you watching, we will be focusing on funding, which is something, of course, that's at the heart of all of our spiritual communities. So I think that's a great teaser to have people come back and see how it's working, the implementation, the barriers, lessons learned, and what it might look like for ministries that want to move forward and adopt this model through the experiences that you're now creating for leaders and ministers to do so.
All right. Sounds
Thank
good.
you. Have a great day. Blessings. Bye-bye.
Bye.